Welcome to the Infomullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the Infomullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. Would be question number 7. And again, all the links for these articles where I go into a lot more detail on each one are in the links to this Facebook. And if you're watching on YouTube later, they're down in the comments section. When it comes to instability, this is kind of my sweet spot from an expertise. I tried to go through a lot of analysis methods and perspective of frameworks of how you would go about answering this question. So yeah, I give an off-the-cuff system scientist question, New Year's Eve. This is my gut instinct, but I try and back it up with what it is I'm counting upon or thinking about when I make this. So the question here is, what areas in the US are ripe for civil unrest in 2020? What factors are feeding the potential conflict and how might it play out? So my forecast, bear with me, I said I forecast no major sustained civil unrest in 2020. You have to, a little caveat, what I think of major sustained civil unrest probably isn't the same as what all you think about as major sustained civil unrest. But I did caveat in the article, and you can go to the article, I said, there may be riots, there may be property destructions, and this is key. There may be property destruction riots emerging out of protest and police overreaction after shooting events. So where I said I was wrong, I described myself as being wrong in a way that actually is what ended up happening. I didn't know there was going to be a major Black Lives Matter movement in end of May 2020. But I mention it several times, and if I'm wrong, this is how I'm wrong, because I saw the conditions. And I also said, or there might be self-defensive riot between opposed political groups. So if you think about the civil unrest we've had, which I would not classify as major civil unrest. I mean, I know that's hard for people because social media has the spotlight effect where we tend to see something and think it's massive. There were a lot of protests, but not what I would classify as sustained mass civil arrest, the same as like the riots after the Martin Luther King assassination or some of the civil rights riots where there is just mass violence going on. We didn't see that too much, but you can disagree with me on that. But where there was violence, clearly we had violence, but it was isolated and it was limited. And I think that bears out in the numbers. I mean, the total dead since the start of the protest in May, maybe between 2 and 3 dozen, right? Over a period of multiple months, not hundreds, not thousands, not tens of thousands, clearly. And why is this? So in the article, I go into one of the first things you need to know about what drives mass instability is there's a structural demographic piece. And this is going to get a little wonky, but it's hopefully to educate why I made this forecast. And it gets into a key element for any forecast of 2021 on the same question. There's 3 things you need to understand from structural demographics when it comes to instability. First is the number of fighting age male population. That's called FAM, F-A-M, fighting age male. And it's called fighting age male because traditionally it's men. You can probably expand that to fighting age men and women or whatever you want to say, but traditionally in the studies it's called FAM. This is an age from 15 to 34, specifically from 15 to 24. And how big is that demographic cohort relative to other population segments? It isn't enough for it to be large. If it's much smaller than all other age demographics, then it's not going to matter. And Gen Z, the Zillennials or the Zoomers or whatever you want to call them, is a smaller age demographic than the millennials. They're much more like Generation X. Boomers were huge, millennials were huge, the Zillennials, not so large a cohort. The second demographic is a relative comparison of socioeconomic status for this FAM demographic, this FAM cohort, this fighting age male to generations that came before. And that can get really tricky, but you're kind of asking yourself, how am I doing relative to people of my age at similar times in the past? And there's a fairly easy proxy for this that you can get into that I use, which is simply unemployment. And unemployment gives you a sense of, it tells you a lot of things that can go on. First of all, if you're unemployed, you don't have a job, you need to show up to the next day, you can be out late, you can be involved in protests, you aren't doing it. You also have less of a suppressant. If you have a job and you're worried about a political retaliation or some sort of blowback on your job, that may be a constraint. So the size of the fighting age male demographic and its unemployment rate are 2 very key factors in this demographics. And traditionally, why I made this forecast, I said I don't think there's much, is traditionally we're at 12 to 19% unemployment for that age demographic, and we were only at 10% up to age 18, and it drops to 3 to 4% after that. So going into the year, we had very low unemployment. Now, obviously, people of color, communities of color, those unemployment rates tend to be a little higher. And so those numbers don't necessarily hold. So making this forecast, I was looking at, end of 2019, going into 2020, I said, unemployment's relatively low. The age cohort is fairly small relative, but look at what's happened. Let's take a look now at where we're at for unemployment just last year to this year in these demographics. And I've circled them in red. This is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They come out with unemployment numbers every slice and dice. And this is the E16, I think, table. It's a little cut off there. It's unemployment rate by age, sex, race, and Hispanic or Latino ethnicity. So just to read the chart, this is age and sex down the bottom. I've cut it off at a certain point. You have the total across the country, and then they look at white, Black or African American, Asian, Hispanic or Latino, and they're really comparing third quarter 2019 to third quarter 2020. So we're really focusing now on the change, the demographic change in unemployment after this pandemic year. And this is why I'm calling some red flags right now for 2021. Let's first of all break it down by a major racial group, right? White, 16 to 19 years old, it went from 12% unemployment to 17% employment. Remember, if you're youth, unemployment's always higher than the national average, but it jumped 5 points last year to this year. Black or African American went from 18% to 25%. That's a very high number. That you're talking about a quarter of the population now out of work in that key demographic. Asian, 12 to 21%. Hispanic, 16 to 23%. Anytime you have a number over 15%, you're in a warning area, and 25% or higher is a danger sign. And also it applies to, normally unemployment rates drop once you get 18 or older. It's much worse if you're a teenager and or you're just getting your first job. And then if you're 20 to 24 years, it drops. And you can see this where it was from 12%, 16 to 19 years, whites, 20 to 24 years drops in half, 6.3. That's a fine number. That's an okay number. It's doubled in the last year to 12%. And that's in the white. And as I mentioned, if you're a community of color, you're going to have, and systemic disparities are working against you, you're already, the deck is stacked against you, you're going to hit it worse. So 20 to 24 Black or African American fighting age male went from 12, doubled to 25. Asian from 8 to almost 20, and Hispanic or Latin America from 6 to almost 14%. These are not good numbers. These numbers give me concern. If somebody wants to ask a forecast for the same forecast, where do I see causes? That number would cause me to be very cautious about what I'm saying in the forecast for 2021 compared to what I said for 2020. And the last aspect of this question 7, what is the third structural demographic? This one has to do with your expectations. So expectations is how I'm looking at the future. And you can think, if I think that the future is going to be not just the same, but better for me, you can think of my future expectation as an incline growing up. And that's a good expectation. As I get older, I get more skills, I get more money, I have more security. If your future expectations decline from where you think they were, it's called an expectations gap. Things like income inequality, things like unaffordable housing, things like student debt, they all contribute to this perception that I thought my future was going to go up at a certain incline. Now I see it as going up as less of an incline or even flat. That perceptions gap, the larger that perception gap is an expectation, and this is important. This is perception. This isn't like something you can go out and measure with a thermometer or a gauge or something like that. It's about a perception. And countries around the world have been hammered by this. A big cause of the Arab Spring, a big cause of the riots and protests you've seen in Lebanon, Iraq, and Iran are from large youth demographic bulges that have, and you'll see this when I do the international things, the same thing comes up. Their expectations of what's going to happen ahead have dropped, and the expectations gap has fueled instability. You see this in South America, protests in Bolivia, Argentina, Chile. Expectations gap can be a crucial driver, and clearly people can argue, there's arguments on both sides as to, where the expectations gap were from 2019 heading into 2020. Again, heading into 2021 with the pandemic, that expectations gap is going to be even more prevalent. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the Infomullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a mulleteer and support the Infomullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.